Who would have guessed rotating an object in my game would have been one of the most difficult challenges I had to solve? I just had to find a way to make rotating complicated. Typical. And the worst part is, it could have easily been avoided, and not even through prototyping, but through design. Let me explain. So, we already talked about game mechanics and how we tie it with our idea to get the most out of the game experience. Usually when we think about an idea in detail, we reach a point that we can feel that we got the game nailed down. We know the direction, we know how it works and how it will work, we sometimes even know how it would scale. But let's stop for a second. Is thinking in detail equal to game design? So let's take another small detour and take a look at what the game is. In Rule of Play by Kate Solin and Eric Zimmerman, they define games as a game is a system in which players engage in an artificial conflict defined by rules. Another example by Jane McGonigal defines games as all games share four defining traits: a goal, rule, a feedback system, and a voluntary participation. Another example, a game is an activity among two or more independent decision makers seeking to achieve their objectives in some limiting context. We can see a pattern emerging. Games are constructs, set of rules, mechanics within a network of rules. Games have rules. Simple. In game design, these rules, especially the rules that players have no control over, are identified as game systems. Game systems define how your game world operates, how each piece of your game communicates with each other. But don't fall into the trap of thinking if you know how the world works, the system design is also done. I can say I have made this mistake several times. As I mentioned in my previous video, I started this project with the idea of figuring out the game as I develop it. And the way I approached it made it so not falling into the system design trap was almost impossible. After I was done with some core mechanics, I started testing the game, imagining all the features that I might be missing. In this testing, I found several issues with the design and the direction of the game. The game had no long-term goals. Mining and crafting were getting repetitive and boring quite fast, even with exploration elements and discovering new procedurally generated planets. One of the most exciting parts about any type of management game is the ability to allow players to create their own strategies, finding solutions to their problems, creating a canvas for yourself as a player to build your future plans on top of. In Pocket Galaxy's case, this canvas is the ship. From the beginning, I was determined not to have the ship look like a bunch of square tiles smashed into one another, so I avoided tile-based systems. I also didn't want players to get overwhelmed with all the options possible in the game. To fully min-max your ship, look for guides online, and get anxious about if you made the right decision placing a certain room or station in the right place. It was also important for me that the ship introduced some sort of puzzling challenge, so the ship can also affect how you as a player will experience the world. So I opted for a pre-designed layout. My initial idea was to have all different ship designs by a designer, basically different level design, and players can buy them in the in-game shop for in-game currency to play different levels and experience different challenges in a ship. But there were two problems with that. I had to design dozens of ships, balance them, price them, get feedback, and adjust them. But that also meant that your goals as a player is just to make money to get to the next ship, basically paying in-game currency to unlock new levels, and that was very shallow and boring. In the development of Pocket Galaxy, I juggled many different topics as I was doing the exploratory approach of development, which didn't really allow me to focus on this issue for a very long time. So it took me a while to figure this out. I really disregarded how the ship will affect your gameplay and how you can interact with the ship. But here is where I finally took my own advice from previous videos. It took me some time, but I started focusing on this topic alone. I actually sat down and designed ship interactions, flow, and how it should affect your game. And I think in the end, I found a very good solution. In a way, the best of both worlds. I really like how tile-based management games give you so much control over customizing your own canvas. But at the same time, it can be overwhelming. When you build something that works, it's really rewarding and it really feels like it's yours. You have solved this problem. But sometimes building for the sake of efficiency results in wonky and ugly looking layout. Another positive point about tile-based system is, from a technical point of view, storing and adjusting tile-based system is much easier and straightforward compared to the pre-designed levels. You can just give each type of tile an ID and store them in an array and load the asset associated with that ID. Straightforward. What I like about pre-designed levels and what I was aiming for in this game was pre-designed levels are unique. Levels and layouts can take players on a journey, change the way they think, and push them to think outside of the box. It also allowed a ship to look like a ship, not just tile rooms. The ship has a story to tell, what it has gone through, what the previous owner did, and why certain objects are placed in certain places of this ship. As a designer, you get a lot of options to play around. You can choose to put a mining station room far away from the storage room, making item transfer traits in the character more useful. But this requires a lot of manual labor, design and testing. It also takes away the player's voice, expressing how they want to solve a puzzle and how they want to customize their canvas. So what I came up with was a mixture of both. Ships come in two different modules, the core module and the plugin module. The core module is a fragment of the ship that contains the must-have rooms and stations in order for the loop to not be broken. Basically, the core module is the base layout of a ship that can never be modified. The core is then extendable via connections or socket nodes. These nodes are unused doors that the players can connect to additional plugins. Plugins, on the other hand, are then where you can fully and creatively adjust according to your ship. Plugins range from additional rooms, ship upgrades, and they directly connect to the ship. Each core has a limited tile space that can be expanded. So choosing the right plugin for your current core is something that you will have to experiment with. This method does not only allow you to completely modify your ship and still optimize it to your liking, but it also allows some level of design and storytelling through the environment, especially through the core module. But in order to have this beautiful system, I had to scratch the old system and convert everything into the new tile system. Sounds easy. And this is where the real headache began. It seemed clear at first. Migrate the old system to the new tiles, and everything should be done. Recreate the room in tile system, store this recreation into an array, load it. Very simple steps. The first step was pretty easy. The easiest and the most fun step actually. I just had to experiment with different tile sets as I wanted them to tile very nicely. I did not want this to look like a tile-based game, so I also created half tile sets. These tiles are basically tiles that are half the size and that can overlap with one another. This really helps with the rooms not looking very squarish. After a bit of testing, I recreated the ship in the new tile system. It is very close, but in the process I also found a few issues with the previous design which are solved in the new system. After having the layout set manually, I needed to find a way to keep track of the origin of the object and how the tiles are placed relative to this origin. This was important for generating the tile map and how I will be placing these rooms in the world, as each room will have a different size and different shape. I experimented with few methods, but they all had their own drawbacks. I had to make some compromises in the system design, as I was not getting the result I wanted. So what I ended up doing was to make all rooms have the same origin. Then I also need to predefine their size in the editor for the script to properly place the tiles. And then I had to make sure I have empty tiles that I can reference in the tile generation code. The next step in converting these rooms into an array was to create a container, in this case the ship, the collection, to store these rooms. This gives the code some sort of structure, but it also helps encapsulate certain data in the project. This is the collection system. The collection system then is supposed to aggregate all the rooms and store them based on their IDs. Then based on the room's placement and shape, it creates a silhouette that represents the ship. This silhouette is then used when generating and adding new rooms to the ship as a collision detection, and it also highlights all the docking or sockets available for new rooms to be added. Reflecting on this seems so obvious and the steps are super clear, but I was discovering issues at the same time. I didn't have this overview. I was discovering collections with silhouette while I was discovering that I need to keep the origin of the rooms on the same spot. I was trying to adjust the code to match my ever-changing requirement, which made it impossible to reach a desirable goal. But even after I managed to basically sort out how to generate these tile maps, store them and read them, I realized I needed to rotate the room. Easy, right? The issue with rotating the room came from all the restrictions I set in the previous steps. To narrow it down, the first problem was how to rotate a tile-based room. In other games and other examples in the industry, tile-based games usually address this by creating all the angles available to a certain object and swapping assets. But as I knew in the future I would like to have some sort of procedural generation for the rooms and blueprints, I knew the system wouldn't work for me. So I looked into rotation metrics and how to manually rotate a 2D array. The second problem was keeping the origin where it was. The origin of the room determines how the collection generates the array from the tiles. Rotation matrix usually rotates the entire matrix around a certain origin. That made it almost impossible for me to keep the origin the same spot, as the tiles were ending up on the left or the bottom side of the origin. The third problem was performance. There were several ways to force this rotation. One solution was to rotate the room and then create a virtual origin and regenerate the entire tile map based on the new rotation. Another method was to unparent the entire room after rotation and reparenting it, creating a new origin. But as you could imagine, both of these came with huge performance issues, especially on mobile. After spending 3 weeks on this topic, I shelved it. Not planning my systems and not knowing my requirements not only made me waste time, but it also caused a lot of headache. System design helps you identify how your game will work and what aspects of your game need to know about each other. This is even more important as an indie with limited resources, as it helps trim the fat down easier in the development process. And right now, the most important goal in our development is to have the game playable and get early feedback from you, the players. Rotating the room did not fit this acceptance criteria. Usually we can find ourselves trying to make the most complex and beautiful system that works with everything. But it's important to take a step back every now and then. Remind ourselves if what we are pursuing adds any value to the overall experience of the player. In the end, the most important goal is to create a fun game and not to make the most complex system. That's what I will leave you with. Thank you for watching. Until next time.